Hi, I'm Helen Stubbings and I'm popping in here today to do our first little Love and Hugs video. So over the next few weeks, several of the designers were doing a little technique video for you, and I get to go first, so today is my day. So I'm going to be talking to you about a new project that's being released very soon, and it's called the 12 Days of Christmas Stitch Along. It's nothing fancy, but it will be a completely online project, and it's based on the 12 Days of Christmas poem that you all know. I of course couldn't choose my favourite technique for this, so I decided to do 3 different variations on it, or 3 different versions, which means I'm just trying to keep up with you, stitching 3 different ones as we go throughout the year. And as I said, it will be available online through our We Quilt Stitching Academy, and you get instructions for all 3 versions, so that's red work and applique and Colourque, which is coloured pencil applique, so a technique that I've been doing for many years. You can choose whichever one you'd like to do and then just stitch along with us each month as the next pattern is released, and you just download and print it, or you can pre-purchase an iron-on transfer set. So it's not quite ready yet. It'll be released in the next couple of weeks, and there's going to be a special pre-release offer for all our Love and Hugs friends around the world, so keep an eye on this page, and I'll be back in a couple of weeks with that special pre-release offer just for you. And then you can choose to join in once we get started and just work along at your own pace. So as I said, there's 3 different versions you can do with this project. You can do simple red work stitchery, which is very relaxing, very therapeutic, and very easy to do. For my red work I just use 1 thread, so a variegated red thread. There's a couple of different ones that I use, either a Cottage Garden 1007 Hugs and Kisses red, which is a lovely hand-dyed red thread in a Pearl 12 or a stranded floss from a lovely Australian company here, Cottage Garden Threads, or a Cosmo Seasons 5006 thread, which is again a variegated red that I helped develop with Leishin a few years ago, so that we had a readily available version of my lovely variegated red thread. You can see the red work version about to pop up on the screen. Here's just a little sample there of the red work version. The second version is the Colourque version, so that's coloured pencil applique, and it's just simply a normal coloured pencil on fabric. And I'll be taking you through that step by step today in this video if you hang in there long enough and you want to know how I do Colourque. I developed this technique many years ago and published a book with the American Quilter Society. It was called Faux Applique, so that's still available either from us as a book, or I think you can get an ebook version still from AQS, and that takes you step by step through the traditional version of Colourque. But I'll take you through today just everything that I've found over the years that works for me and the way I like to do it. There are other people out there doing similar things now, and I know throughout the Love and Hugs program last year many of you played with pencil colouring, and there was some beautiful work that I saw in the list, so just stunning. There's lots of different interpretations of it, and I'll just take you through step by step what I use and how I do it. There's also another little video, I'll put a link in the post that I did some time ago, which just goes through all the different materials and pencils and everything that you use for it in more depth. So if you want to watch that to see the materials I use, then you can find that in that other little video in the link. And then the third version of the block of the month is an applique version. If you know me, you know that I love my needle turned applique and the glue stick version that we use with our Hugs and Kisses applique paper. So it's a fairly detailed design, this block of the month, so it's not going to be an overnight project. It won't be like you stitch it in a day like you did with the little 4-inch Christmas blocks or anything. It will be, you'll need a month for each one potentially. Of course, once you've signed up to the program, you don't have to do it on time. It'll be there for you forever as long as the platform stays there. So you can take your time with this lovely slow stitching method, and it just uses our applique paper, and again in the program you get videos to help you through step by step how we did that. So here's a few more little sneak peeks at some of the blocks in the Colourque version, and stay tuned as I take you through step by step on how I did the colouring for this project. This is a version of the video that you will get in the program in the Academy, so a video that takes you step by step through the 3 techniques used, and today I'll share with you the one on the Colourque version. Hope you enjoy it, hope you love it. Remember to pop back in a couple of weeks onto the Love and Hugs page, where I'll be sharing you that special pre-offer to do the block of the month, the 12 days of Christmas stitch along throughout 2021. Stay safe.
Colourque, coloured pencil applique. So coloured pencil on fabric to look like applique. That's a technique that I developed many years ago, and ended up having it published in a book. The book was called Faux Applique, but it was all the technique still available on Colourque. So that's coloured pencil applique or Colourque. And this is another version of our 12 days of Christmas block of the month. So we have the red work version, an applique version, and this is going to be our Colourque version. So I'm going to step you through colouring up my first block. I've transferred my design onto my background fabric. I've used a lighter linen cotton blend fabric, so it's quite light, so my colouring pencil will show up on it quite nicely. It is a reasonably coarse weave of linen, so the coloured pencil is not as smooth as what it is on some fabrics. You can use a much denser weave and you'll get a much smoother look, but it actually looks really nice. So for mine, I've chosen to use Prismacolor pencils, so Premier Prismacolor pencils. I generally use Derwent pencils, and you can use Artist or Studio or the lovely Coloursoft pencils, which are very soft, and that's what I mostly work with, but we've found them a little bit more difficult to get lately, and we've got a new supplier of Prismacolor, so they're a little easier to get. Prismacolor are also much more common in the US and overseas, but you can get Derwent or Prismacolor and both will work fine. You can actually use any colour pencil, but the softer it is, which generally means the more expensive it is, or the type of pencil it is, the easier it is to get onto your fabric and to get a nice, smooth, even colour. So as I said, I'm using Prismacolor pencils, and I've just selected a range of colours out of the tin of 72. But you don't have to use as many as me. I'm not going to be giving pencil colours or thread colours for this project, because everyone will have their own pencils that they can use, and you can choose your own colourways and your own threads that you can use. I will tell you in the end what I have used, but I want you to be courageous and choose what you've got, and use what you've got as far as the threads and the pencils go. Of course, if you want them, we do have them available as well. So we have tins of 24, tins of 72, and this was my Christmas present to myself. So this is a box of 150 beautiful Prismacolors. So there's 3 layers in there, but I haven't eaten into those yet. Okay, now the secret to Colourque and making it easy to get onto the fabric is putting your fabric onto a sandpaper board. Now this is just simply a sheet of sandpaper, about a 600 grit sandpaper, and I've glued it onto a piece of timber board, a little just MDF board. We do make these and personalise them even there. This was for an event and poor Christine couldn't come, so I'm using Christine's here, so she feels happily used. So we place our fabric onto the sandpaper, and what that does is 2 things. One, it helps sand the pencil off the pencil onto the fabric, and secondly, it grips your fabric, because you're going to be colouring quite hard and you don't want that fabric to slide around everywhere, so the sandpaper grips it. I'm going to start with my leaves, and I'm going to choose 2 greens. And if you want, you can either have a scrap of fabric, or you can just use the very edge in the seam allowance just to audition your colours. Okay, so I'm going to use those 2 greens. First of all, I'm going to colour my leaf shape in completely. So I'm going to colour the whole shape. Now I'm going to just sharpen a little bit. Now it's good to have a good quality metal pencil sharpener because you've paid a lot for these pencils, so you want a good quality sharpener. And sharpeners like rotary blades and sewing machine needles, they do blunt. So if that's not coming off smoothly when you sharpen, your blade's probably getting blunt and it's time to get a new one. Otherwise you're going to crack the pencil all the way up the shaft and you'll be very unhappy. So first of all, I'm going to colour in my complete shape. Now, we're taught at kindergarten not to go over the lines and to colour in one direction to get a nice even colour. Going over the lines is reasonably important. It doesn't matter because if we don't seal it, it will wash out, but we want to keep it as clean as possible. So we just stay on the line. So what I tend to do is draw on the line and then colour inside it. It just gives you a boundary to colour to. Now a lot of people, because they don't want to go over the line, they actually stop short of the line and they end up with this white gap area around here. And we're going to be stitching over these lines in the end to finish it off, so you don't want that white gap there. So I suggest you draw on the line and then colour it in. Now as far as colouring in one direction goes, it's not so important. Just go round and round and round, however it works. The important thing is that you want to get nice even colour. You don't want sort of white blotchy bits. And if I show you, if I do one here, see how I've got light and I've got dark and you've got a pencil stroke there. So you just keep layering up until you get nice even colour. I'm not pressing very hard because I've got these lovely Prismacolors that are very soft. The Coloursoft would be the same. I'm not pressing very hard at all. You can start very soft if you're a little timid or a little scared, very soft there, and then just continue to layer up. Or you can work out the colour you want and just press that hard and do it all in one go. You'll get used to it as you go. Now see I've got that line showing up there? That's actually a line in the linen fabric. So if you had that much denser fabric, a higher weave fabric, then you'd get a smoother finish there. But I'm not worried about that. I like the linen slubby look of the linen coming through as a bit of texture. The reason we put the sandpaper onto the piece of timber, one of the reasons, is we don't want anything that's underneath that sandpaper to come through like a rubbing. Remember we used to sort of put paper over leaves and things like that and rub to get the texture coming through? Well, the same thing will happen if you've got a timber table with lots of knots and things in it, then that will show through in your colouring. So I just put the sandpaper onto that board and that's my colouring board that can go with me wherever I like. And you can see how quickly these are all coming together and being coloured in. I'm starting to get a little blunt. I'm about to resharpen because I just want it sharp enough to be able to get into those points and things and stay within the lines. So I don't need it too sharp for this particular part because I'm actually colouring a whole area, so I want a flat part to be able to easily colour in a large area at once without getting sharp pencil strokes. So it's good to just have that little flat edge on your pencil where you can colour in a large area without getting pencil strokes, but I can turn it to get the point when I want to go into the point of that leaf without going outside the line. Now remember with this method, if you don't seal it, and we'll go through it at the end afterwards, then the pencil's not going to be permanent. So if you do go outside the line, don't get too stressed over it because we won't seal it and then it will just wash out or eventually rub off. If you make a mistake and actually put the wrong colour in an area, then you can just get a white eraser, a clean white eraser, and rub it off. Rub most of it off, enough of it off to be able to put another colour over the top. Make sure to keep the same intensity and the same even colouring across the whole block. You don't want to start dark and then get really light at the bottom. You can see that's coming off quite nicely with very little effort. My hand's quite relaxed, I'm not getting crampy. But if you do, just stop. Stop and have a little bit of a stretch of your fingers and your hands. And keep on that sandpaper there, because that just makes life so much easier. And that is the true secret to this, to making it enjoyable. So if you weren't using a Prismacolor or a Coloursoft, which were the two softest pencils, if you're just using a Derwent Artist or a Studio or some other type brand of pencil, then it would be a little bit more work, but it's still definitely doable. You just have to push a little harder to get that pencil onto the fabric, and probably have a break a little more often if your hands start to get crampy. We spend so much of our lives now on a computer keyboard rather than with a pen in our hand. Colouring in, if you don't do it very often, you may start to cramp because we're just not used to holding a pencil like that for a long time anymore. Now that we've covered all our base colour in the green leaves, I want to show you some blending, so adding a little bit of extra colour to give it some dimension and a little bit more interest. You might be quite happy with flat colour, and that actually looks quite nice if you've done nice even colouring, but it's not that difficult, and it adds a whole lot more interest and depth to your piece if you add some blending. Now, I'm not a trained pencil artist nor a painter. I'm just completely self-taught, so what I do may not be artistically correct. So if you want to be more artistically correct, then, and you know all about that, then feel free. But I just look at each individual object and try and give that some shape and some definition. So technically we're meant to think of the light coming from one direction and shadow being on the other side, and that gives us that depth and dimension. So the shadow on the bottom of a leaf and the light's hitting the top side of it. I sort of look at each one and think, how can I make that look like a round leaf? Now, there are two blending methods that I use, and again, it's just what I've developed. They may not be actual proper blending methods, although I believe they are. But the first one is very scientifically called my Flicky Feathery blending method. And I start with quite a sharp point on my pencil, and I've gone a shade darker, so a green a shade darker than the base colour that I use. And then I start from the tip and I do a flicky feathery stroke like this. And what I mean by flicky feathery is, as I'm flicking, I lift off of the fabric, so I'm reducing the pressure. So the end of my stroke is very, very fine. And I just keep flicking like that until I've got some dimension on my leaf. And you can see straight away there that it looks like we've got shadow here and the light hitting over here. And we've suddenly got a rounded three-dimensional shaped leaf. On this side, if I was going to be technically correct, I would flick on this side so my shadow's still underneath. Or if my light's coming from the top, then my shadow might be underneath on this side. So I can flick in both directions. If you find that hard, then turn your work around so that it feels comfortable as you're flicking. And there's my other piece, other leaf there. If I was to do it again on this one, what we don't want to get is a solid line of the different colour. So see, I'm sort of going along the leaf instead of coming towards the centre, and I've ended up with a solid line between that colour and that colour. And I don't really want that. I want them to be, the two colours to gradually blend into each other so it looks more natural. So I just need to make a few strokes a different length, and I can just break, so flick inwards instead of along the edge, and I can just break up that solid line so again it looks more natural. Now you can use your finger and blend those colours in, particularly if you're using the softer Coloursoft or Prismacolor pencils. You can use a blending stick, or if you're happy with how it looks, then just leave it as it is. And when we're putting the sealer on, you can also use the brush and the sealer to blend it in a little bit as well. But we just want it to look nice and soft and natural like that. So remembering again that I'm pressing hard at the edge, and as I'm flicking, I'm lifting off the fabric so I get little fine feathery strokes on the end of my pencil strokes. I'm going to go ahead and finish the rest of these leaves. And there we have all of our leaves with a little bit of shading on it, which gives it so much more interest and depth and dimensional sort of look to it, and it was really quite simple. Now, as you're working through your work, just so you don't get it messy, I've smudged it a little bit here because it's quite easy to brush that colour over. Just get a small hand towel or something and set it over the work, or turn your work around so you're not having your hands over the other pieces as you colour. I'm going to leave it open here now so you can see as much as possible, but just try and keep your work as neat as possible. You won't seal anything that's outside the lines, but it's nice just to keep it from getting grubby. Next we're going to do our pairs, and we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pairs here. I'll just run through one pair. Again, I've taken 2 yellows, so just a yellow and sort of a mustardy colour here. It's called yellow ochre. And again, I'm going to colour the complete bottom section first, and I can just do big round strokes with a little flat edge on my pencil lead until I've got that nice and even. Then I'm going to switch to my darker colour, and I'm just going to use the pressure blending method, and all that is exactly how it sounds. It's just a different pressure, so the harder you push, the darker the colour. If you don't push as hard, so if you lift the pressure off, then it's not going to be as dark, and you can work one area into another. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of, we've got actual stitching lines in here that are meant to represent, if we weren't doing colouring, if we were just doing red work, meant to represent the three-dimensional sort of look of the pear. But I'm just going to add a little bit of shading, so I'm just pushing hard where I want it the darkest, down here where the shadow of the pear is. And then as I work my way into the lighter yellow, I just lift off the pressure so you can't see a line there at all. It's simply blending the darker colour into the lighter colour. I'll do a little bit of shadow around the edges because it is a rounded pear, so we need it to get some shadow on the edges to show that that's disappearing into the background there, and some shadow on the bottom. And you can just see there how subtle that is, but it just gives some definition, and then we'll add more definition with our stitching when we stitch over our transfer line. So that's a pear. Next we're going to have a look at these flowers here, and I've chosen 3 pinks to work with the flowers. So the lightest one I'm just going to colour lightly on that centre part there. And you can see those horizontal lines on there, they're part of the design that will be stitched. So they will give some interest and definition to this area without having to add any shading to that, unless you'd like to. I'm going to do that outer part here in a darker pink. It's slightly darker, it's not much difference in colour, but I'm also pressing harder so I get that slightly darker look. And it's fairly fine, so I want to make sure I've got a bit of a point on my pencil, just so that I can get into that tiny little space there without going over the edges too much. And I'm going to do these little circles here in this pink as well, so I'm just going to sharpen up a little bit because they're small and I don't want to go over the edges with a big fat thick pencil. That one's not so bad, but these little tiny ones here are very tiny, like that. And then I'm just going to add a little bit of shading, a little bit of definition with this darker, it's called Crimson Lake. Now, some of the darker colours are very, very strong, so you can go very light-handed on them. So I'm just, while I'm testing it, I'm just going to go very light here. And combination of my Flicky with that sharp point and a bit of blending, I'm just going to put a slight little shadow down the bottom edge there, again to make it look round and just give it an extra layer of dimension. Quite subtle, but you can see it. If you wanted to, you could put just a little bit on your circle there too to make that look like a 3-dimensional circle. See that tiny bit there. So same in these little ones here, just the lighter colour. Because it's quite similar, it doesn't even matter if I go over the lines a little bit. This one needs to be more in its spot, so in between there, because that's the darker one. And then with my very dark Crimson Lake, just a tiny bit of definition down the bottom here. And you probably can hardly see it on the video, but you'll see when you look later how much extra depth and definition it gives it to you by just doing that tiny little bit there. And the last thing we would do would be the bird. I've got 3 blues for the body of my bird, so I'm going to colour the complete shape in with the lightest blue. And remember, it's not a realistic bird, it's just my design, so just representational. So colouring in the bottom. And then these feathers on the bottom here, I'm going to colour those with the darker, because the transfer line was a grey blue, so now that I've coloured it in grey blue, it's a little difficult to see. And then with this darkest blue here, again it's quite strong, I'm going to get a nice sharp point. And I'm just gently going to define those feathers. So you can definitely see again where they were. And you'll have a stitch line there as well that will give you that definition once we do the back stitch around it. Then I'm just going to paint what I call the little saddles in here. Colour them in, I'm sorry, not paint. It's just a bit of colour because most of the definition in this is done with the stitching over the top. We have little decorative details over the top. So you can use whatever colours you like in this. And that's our bird done. The last but not least bit we haven't done is the trunk. I'm going to use this tealy green here, just quite lightly. And you may think, why am I suddenly introducing this? But I am using it in other blocks as well, so it will all tie in. As I get to that finer point, I need to be able to just break my pencil. One little tip is with these pencils, make sure they don't drop on the floor and you break the lead all the way up the shaft, because every time you sharpen it, it will just break off. So I'm just taking that fine tip right to the top. And then with my darker of the 2 greens, I'm just going to give it a little bit of shadow on one side. Very gently, very subtle. And then we'll come back and do our embroidery over the top. So I'll finish this up and then we'll be back to talk about sealing and then stitching. To make the colour pencil permanent on our fabric, we need to seal it. So a lot of people think you can just heat set it with an iron, it will stay there. But through all the testing that I've done, it just does not stay there. One, you can just rub it. If you folded that in half, you can see that it crocks. So the colour crock, it's what we call crocks, moves from there to over there. And it will eventually rub off or wash out. So if we want it to stay looking like that, then we need to seal it now before we stitch it. Always remember to turn your board over. Don't seal on the sandpaper side, or you're going to end up putting lots of stuff on there that will get you texture through the fabric. And just use some sort of board or mat that you can clean to do your sealing on, because it will go through and it's like a glue. So you can put it on a table and clean it off afterwards, or I just use the back of my colouring board. Now there are a few different sealers. There is the one that I've always used and is mentioned in the book is the Colourque brand by Plaid, and it comes in a bottle this shape, but it's been very difficult to get supply of for the last few years. If you find the Deco Art or Americana brand in the same size bottle of this, then it's probably exactly the same. But I also now use the Jacquard Textile Colourless Extender. So it's what you mix with paints to make them go further or a little runnier. And that works as well, and that we've got a lot of stock of that in at the moment, so, and you can find that in a lot of places. So either the Folk Art brand by Plaid, the Deco Art or the Americana, all in a bottle like that, works fine, or the Jacquard Textile Medium. It's a Textile Colourless Extender if you're looking for that, and we have that. Now there are a little bit different between the two. So this is the one when I wrote the book that was the only one that was available, the only type that was available, apart from Jo Sonja brand. Now Jo Sonja brand is the only ones that we've actually ever had issues with, so I do say to stay away from the Jo Sonja brand. It's fine for what it was designed for, because obviously these weren't designed for colouring on fabric with coloured pencil, they were designed for mixing with paint. So Jo Sonja is fine for that. But for this method that I'm using it for, it's just a little thick and heavy, and it stays quite plasticky, and it actually dulls the colour as well because it's quite milky. So this type, the Folk Art or the Deco Art, it's quite thin and runny, and it works really well. And I've used it, as I said, for years, and I did lots and lots of testing on it, and it works really well. So it's mentioned in my book and in other videos that I've got. And I find with this one that you don't have to heat set it afterwards. I've tested it with and without, and it's fine, everything just stays. The negatives of this one are that if you go outside the line, it stains like a watermark, or if you drip some on there, it stains like a watermark. So, and you can't get rid of that stain once it's there. So you can't do a wash, you can't sort of fade out a colour, you can only sort of do closed shapes, and it works beautifully for that. It goes a long way and it goes on really easily. But that's the only downfall of it, that you just can't do that wash where you just want to do, fade out a lawn on the horizon or the sky on the horizon, something like that. You can't do that. You can only use it in closed shapes. But that's the way I've done most things so far. The Jacquard one, the Colourless Extender, I found doesn't stain that background fabric. So you can use it like a wash. You don't have to. I could use it along that very thin line and it won't stain outside the colour. Having said that though, if you don't heat set it once you've done it, then it doesn't hold the pigment in. It will wash out and it will just rub off while it's still wet. It'll move and rub off. So we seal it and we let it dry completely, and then we heat set it with a cloth, a damp cloth, or steam, a lot of steam. So, and then it seems to be permanent and it's fine. It also says, I think, certainly the other one says, to heat set it with a cloth soaked in white vinegar. Now you can do that if you like, but at least do it with some steam. So this one says the colour to dry on fabric, then heat set by ironing on reverse side for 30 seconds at temperature suited to the fabric. Always test before you do your whole piece, just to make sure, because you don't want to do your whole block or even your whole quilt and then wash it and it all washes away. So please always test, because if you're not using the same product with the same pencils and the same fabric, then no one can guarantee that it's going to work. I haven't had issues, but I always test first just to make sure. I don't want to do the whole thing and then it all washes off or it looks horrible. Okay, so for today I'm going to use the Jacquard one. If you're using this one, always use a little paint pot and put a little bit at a time in it, because as soon as it hits the air, it starts to dry and go like a glue. So just have a little bit at a time, and then you can set it right next to where you're working so you don't drip and get that watermark on it. But I'm going to use this one, and for now I'm just going to use, because it was upside down, I'm just going to use what's in the lid first. Now I just use a small flat paintbrush, about a size 2. If you prefer a round one, you can work with that. Don't get a really expensive one, because it's going to gum up even if you wash it straight away. But it does have to be a bristle brush. It can't be one of the plastic craft ones, because they just won't hold any medium in them. And I tend to start with the lightest area first. So I'm going to start with the pink and just load up your brush. Now this is quite thick, so when you put your brush down, it's not going to run, whereas the Folk Art one, it's more of a runny liquid, so when you put your brush down, if you've got a lot on it, it could run to the side. This one I have to move. So I'm just going to paint all over where I've coloured. And in this instance I can just go over both colours because they are the same colour. If I had a green and a yellow or something, then I'd do each section individually rather than swiping across, because I could move the colour with me. I'm going to try not go outside the line because, again, this pencil colour is very soft and I could move it with the medium and end up with having pink pencil on the white fabric. If you look at the brush, you can see that it does pick up a bit of the colour. Because the pencils are so soft, it does pick up a little bit of the colour. So we want to make sure we've got it all covered so that we know that it is well and truly sealed in there. I'm not worrying about that little bit of green, it's not moving, so I'm just carefully going around it, but I'm not worrying too much. I'll seal it while I'm there because it's not moving the green, so it seems to be safe. Doing a little dot. So we'll do all the lightest areas first just to protect them so that no other colour can fall on top of them. And it's up to you how you do this. You might want to colour all the pink and then seal it, then come back and colour all the green and seal it, for example. It's totally up to you how you do it, or you just work your way around the quilt. Or around the block in this case. So I have done this technique on very large whole cloth quilts. If you have a look in the Faux Applique book, if you've got that, or on our website, and in the other tutorials you'll see the lace quilt, which is a whole cloth quilt, which had about 100 hours of colouring, but that was a lot less than if I'd appliqued it. So I did a section at a time, and then I sealed that, and then came back and did the next section. Whatever I could do in one session, I coloured and sealed, so I never left it unsealed to get anything spilt on it. Right, so I've done my pinks, now I'm going to go to the yellows. Now if I've got any pink on my brush, I just swish it round and make sure that there's nothing really intense there that I'm then going to put onto the yellow. So next I'm going to do the yellow. You could go and wash your brush, but I'm a bit lazy for that, so I'll literally just swish it around and get any of that colour off the brush. If it was very intense colour and you're about to go onto a light colour, then you want to just be a little bit careful that you don't take one colour onto the other. I do think that you use more of the jacquard than you do of the faux art because it is a little thicker, so I think it won't last as long. And the jacquard is also more expensive. So there's pros and cons for everything. I've cleaned my lid, I'm going to go over here now. And you want to make sure that it doesn't have to soak through to the back, but you do have to make sure that it's caught every part of the colour and locked it into the fabric. Remembering we've still got a row of stitching to clean up and neaten our fuzzy edges to give a really clean edge. Alright, so my yellow's done. I'm actually going to put a little bit more into the lid. And start on my, actually I'll do my blue first. Finish up the bird. Just being a little bit careful that that dark red doesn't move on to any other colour. No, it's behaving. And now I'm going to do my green. And that's it, I'm sealed. So I'm going to leave that. Oh no, we've got the stem. And we're done. I'm going to leave that to dry, and then we'll back to seal and put our stabilizer on and stitch. Next, I'm going to heat set that jacquard textile medium that I used, and I'm also going to fuse a stabilizer to the back. So I can actually do this in one go really, because I need a hot steam iron for both methods. So first of all, I'm going to take my stabilizer with the blue side up and place that on top. Then I'm going to use our Hugs and Kisses pressing sheet. It's just a nylon pressing sheet that you can use to protect your work, but it still has the holes in it so that the steam can go through. So the Hugs and Kisses Stitchery stabilizer that I've used on the back, that needs to be applied with steam, with a steam iron, about 20 seconds on each spot. And the textile medium that we used to seal in the colour pencil also needs to be heat set with steam. So I figure I can do both at once. So I just have a hot steam iron here, and I have my pressing sheet so nothing is sticking. I'm not going to catch that stabilizer on the iron and burn it or melt it. It's going to be lovely and smoothly applied, so I won't get any bubbles or any lifting. And at the same time, my Colourque is being heat set. Now, if you'd use the Folk Art or the Deco Art brand, then you probably don't have to do this part of it. But if you have to put your stabilizer on, it won't hurt to heat set it as well. We'll just make sure it's nicely done. Okay, take my pressing sheet off, and we're all set and sealed. So the next step would be to put it into my embroidery hoop and stitch all the outlines.